Hey everybody, John Sig here, the West of the East West Connection Wrestling Podcast for my partner KG on the East. Welcome to edition 2, episode 2 of the East West Connection Wrestling Podcast. Today we're going to be going over week 2 of the Monday Night Wars, Monday Nitro, WWF Raw, and ECW. First, going to recap last week a little bit, catch you up to speed. KG, what happened last week on the programs? We didn't have a Monday Night Raw because of the dog show or tennis or something, but we got preempted. It was a good week for Monday Nitro. What do you got?
Well, we saw the first ever Monday Nitro from Minneapolis, Minnesota, the Mall of America. We had the return of Lex Luger, in which he challenged Hogan, or Hogan challenged him. I can't remember which one. I think he challenged Hogan.
It was Hogan
And
challenge, but Luger was all over the place. Nobody knew what his intentions were.
either way, they were set up for the main event this week was going to be Hogan and Luger, and so that's what we're going to be looking forward to. ECW, we're now 2 weeks removed from Eddie Guerrero and Dean Malenko leaving ECW for WCW, so we're still going to see the after effects of that, and we'll have our first Monday Night Raw from the Manhattan Center this week.
Cool, good deal. And with that said, we might as well jump right into Monday Night Raw, Manhattan Center. Cool venue. There was the top half of the Hammerstein Ballroom set up right in downtown New York City. Cool venue. We've been there before. A couple different shows, Ring of Honor, ECW reunion shows. Cool place, man. Any thoughts on the ballroom?
I was always amazed how they filmed in there because it was really tight. They kind of made it look even a little bit bigger on TV than it actually appeared. But
Sure.
it was very tight, a lot of stairs to get up into the venue.
Yeah.
But definitely a cool place to see a wrestling event. I don't know how
Right.
often they have shows there anymore, Ring of Honor or who, but it's definitely a cool venue for sure.
Yeah, sure. And being a fat guy when I used to be going to shows there about 10, 15 years ago, I definitely remember the steps. That was no fun. But let's still jump right into it. Raw. It was September 11th, 1995. We started off the show recap of the SummerSlam ladder match. This was the second ladder match in company history. Of course, the first WrestleMania 10. This was the rematch with Shawn and Razor. What do you say? Good match, as good as the first.
I don't think it was. I think the first one just seemed to gel a little bit better, and being that it was the first one in WrestleMania, I think it had a lot more to do than this one. But it
Sure.
was still a pretty good match, except for this outcome. We saw HBK come out on top rather than Razor. So, and these are two probably the biggest stars or the hottest stars right now in the WWF. So they're featured quite a bit on this week's Raw.
Sure. Next thing up, we see the British Bulldog, fresh off a heel turn with the new haircut. Lex Luger, of course, jumped over last week, and they were in the middle of the Allied Powers run, the U.S. UK connection. So Bulldog was kind of directionless. They threw him with Jim Cornette and gave him a haircut and said, "You're the top heel. Let's see what you got, pal." So
Yeah,
I
I
like.
thought it was I thought it was a pretty a decent match, and I liked the Bulldog turn. I think it he ran with this for quite a while with Cornette. But yeah, Razor Ramon versus the British Bulldog with Jim Cornette. I thought it was a pretty decent match. We saw Dean Douglas enter the match though. About 3/4 of the way in, and we're gonna do a little segment on Dean. What was your thoughts of the Dean Douglas character?
Well, I liked it. As a kid at the time, I wasn't a fan, but just because he was such a good heel. So it turns out he was doing his job. I thought it was a good character. I thought it could have had legs if they let it. The Click didn't like working with him. They didn't think he was up to snuff in the ring or whatever. You read a different book, you'll get a different story. But the consensus is the Click held back Shane Douglas's tenure. So yeah, I think it would have been interesting to see if Shane either got in with the right people or didn't piss off the wrong people, to see what Dean Douglas, that character, could have had in it. There was at least somebody had faith in it. He had the Intercontinental title for a day, a cup of coffee, whatever. He was that transitional guy from Shawn to Razor when Shawn lost his smile or whatever gimmick he had that time for not dropping it. But
Right.
yeah, so we'll see. Or well, I guess we won't see. But it didn't work out well for the Dean. But I thought there was legs there if they wanted it to be.
Definitely a very young and up and coming guy. You think they would have ran with it a little bit longer than they did, but obviously there were some tensions there with him and the Click. So after we saw his run in, we saw another run in with the 1-2-3 Kid. The 1-2-3 Kid had actually come in and did a splash or whatever his top rope move was then, and actually hit it Razor. And those two were kind of have already had friction at this point.
Right.
So Bulldog was actually the winner by DQ, and in enters Vince McMahon into the ring. And we hear Vince conducting the interview, but like we had some distractions going on there that was really driving me nuts and hard to watch.
Yeah, it stands out if you watch, especially coming back and from today's product to go back and rewatch this. The King, he essentially he became the sole commentator when Vince got in the ring. It was still him and Vince on commentary. Now, at this point, King isn't just the commentator; he's still the heel commentator. So he needed to throw a zing shot in literally every line over Vince talking, trying to get the point across. So you couldn't, it was super mumbled, couldn't understand what point was getting put across. King put himself over more than it completely took away from the segment. So, but well, with that said, though, I do want to point out how much we miss Vince McMahon as a commentator and a personality. It's a lot different than the Mr. McMahon character that everybody's used to. But for me, I,
Sure.
I grew up on it, so I love over the top Vince McMahon. No, we didn't get him. Like I love that. I'd kill
Yeah.
for that again. That's just me.
He always seemed to provide a good backstory and a good, theater of the mind of what was going on between the two guys in the ring.
Right.
And yeah, he was a little crazy and over the top, but he did, provide other things that were, beneficial to the match and beneficial to the feud. To give you perspective, I can think of when Brett and Owen were feuding, that he did some great stuff on commentary then. But yeah, I've always enjoyed Vince on the mic. Even back
Yeah.
to his pink suit days.
Right. All right. Next segment saw Owen and Yoko, tag team champions, going up against Men on a Mission. Kev, what do you have about Men on a Mission?
Well, not my favorite tag team, but they were some pretty big dudes. Actually, when you watch the tape of that, Yoko is a massive guy, but somehow King Mabel dwarfs him and just makes him look not as huge as he was a 400 or 500 pound guy. I mean, he was a
Sure.
monster. But so we're gonna see that next week. They teased a lot for next week.
Yeah.
Moving along to the second match, we saw the Smoking Guns versus Radford and the Brooklyn Brawler. What'd you think about this one?
And for an enhancement match, I actually liked it. I thought at this point in his career, the Brooklyn Brawler was a general. He led Billy and Bart to a watchable match that really they had no business having at that point. Their
Sure,
mustaches and mullets were on point. I'll give them that. But
definitely.
the gun
Bonus
train
points.
was it was rolling. They were pushing these guys pretty hard at this point. But Red Radford and the Brooklyn Brawler held their own, got a good match out of them. So I thought it did its job, putting over the Smoking Guns.
Definitely. So following this match, we saw a really interesting promo and teasing the debut of one Goldust.
Right.
Really cool promo. Very different look almost to Goldust. Really creepy, but it definitely sucked you in as a viewer.
Sure. And this is noticeably out of place in the cartoony WWF of 1995. This really was like pushing barriers. This broke some glass and broke the ceiling for what a weird character was supposed to be in '95. You had characters like the Goon and just it's so over the top. Duke Drosy, the Garbage Man.
Yeah,
But this
the
Goldust
Goon.
thing, this was gonna be something out there. Yeah, for sure. And it was a slow build too. This was one of many promos to get you in the psyche of Goldust. Very cool character in the beginning.
Yeah, definitely. All right, match number three saw Isaac Yankem facing Scott Taylor. At this point, Isaac Yankem was currently feuding with Bret Hart, so he was on the up and up. But also, we're getting back to the kind of cheesy, gimmicky characters with
Right.
the evil dentist. Really just I don't know, tacky, I guess you could say.
Yeah. No, everybody had a profession first, and then they were a wrestler. I don't know how that happened. So I guess that was the thing. If you want to be a pro wrestler, go into a profession first, and then Vince will hire
Right.
you. But
Yes, be a
yeah,
dump truck driver,
yeah, yeah, exactly. Dump truck driver, race car driver. Doesn't matter. He's got a spot for everybody.
a
So
clown.
yeah. Hey, but Doink actually was pretty over. That was a unique character as a heel, I thought. But that could be
Yeah,
a conversation for another day.
sure.
Next up, we saw some stuff with Todd Pettengill. Todd Pettengill was an over-the-top character in the WWF.
Mhm.
He's kind of cool though. They could do something like this nowadays. I thought setting up the merchandise and pushing for merch sales and that kind of thing. Not too over the top like this, but there's a way that something like this could be done today too. You have any thoughts
Yeah,
on
I just
Dennis
thought
the Tin
it was
Treater?
too it was too over the top for me. Um, it was just, yeah, I don't know. I felt, it really spoke to the times of what we were watching with WWF, and just, another thing that was just super corny. And we're going to see this for a while before they, start to play catch up with WCW and realize that they're falling behind in the Monday Night Wars. So week two, we're already like, oh boy, this is, some of it's going to be a little tough to watch, but some of it's going to be kind of fun and funny to watch as well. It's not all horrible. The main event was up next, which featured Psycho Sid versus HBK, the IC champion at this point.
Yep.
Pretty decent match, I thought. Pretty solid
Yeah.
for a main event.
Yeah, for sure. Sid kind of surprised me here. You think of him now, the way he's generalized in wrestling, history, as this big, goofy, dumb, whatever, like an oaf. But he can move. He was agile. Even back in '95, he hit a nip up, just off the ground, boom, right up to his feet. So with the right opponent, and Shawn Michaels is the right opponent for anybody, this was a good match. And then it was a TV match. Sid had better matches on pay-per-view with Shawn and with Brett and those guys. So in this era, Sid was actually pretty decent, and he's always a good promo until he got back to WCW in the late '90s. This
Yeah.
stuff was off, but he was good,
Yeah.
man. Master ruler of the world,
Yeah, I always liked Sid. I always felt he was a little bit underrated. Even everybody talks about WrestleMania 8 and how they wish they saw Hogan and Flair, which of course everybody did, but it wasn't a great match between them. But I thought if the build was great, the Royal Rumble finish from '92, and the character just kind of had different layers too. He wasn't just Psycho Sid or Sid Justice, Sid Vicious. He had different. It was, I thought he had more to offer even than what was given to him. But he got to the high ranks. So after HBK had won this match, we see Shawn Michaels start to begin to take his clothes off in the ring. And at this point, you're not watching the ECW arena live from Philadelphia. We're watching a mostly children's show, and you have a grown man in the ring taking his clothes off. And I know years later, it's something that Bret Hart really felt, was very tasteless at this time. And I tend to agree with it. I'm watching, I'm like, and he looked like he was gonna, he started stripping and taking his clothes off in front of
Sure.
kids.
Yeah, right. It was a different audience at the time. '95 to the height of the Attitude Era was a completely different crew of fans in the crowd. This was a lot of kids and a lot of families, and it was out of place. But he was over, I guess, and I don't know. It might have had something to do with the Playgirl run that he had at the time, but yeah, it was classy or classless, and it came out kind of out of place for the time.
Yeah, and you know what? It speaks to the carte blanche that Shawn Michaels, HBK had with the company and had with Vince McMahon. We all know the crush and infatuation he had with Shawn. Not taken away from anything the guy can do in the ring, but certainly his backstage politics around this time, especially, were to be questioned. He was not an
Right.
easy guy to work with, and didn't sound like the best locker room rah rah type of guy.
Sure. Now, at this point, normally, if this was a show in today's era of television wrestling, that would have been it. They would have finished with the finish, your little tagline at the bottom, your credits, that would have been it. Now, instead,
Right.
1995, they plug the taped show for next week with clips. Not only do they talk about what's going to happen on next week's taped show, they literally show you clips of what's going to happen as a teaser. It was more hype between the Kid and Razor, and the slow build to the Kid's heel turn that they were pushing here. But it came off very out of place, very weird. That not only would they go ahead and tell you it's a taped show, especially when Nitro's live every week, but yeah, it came off pretty weird to say.
Well, not only that, but following the main event, they did a quick interview segment with two dudes with attitudes who were HBK and Diesel. So we went from the main event to an interview, and then showing clips of
Right.
actual footage from the matches from next week, showing you and telling you that this isn't live, and here's what you have to look forward to, and kind of giving it away. It did seem very out of place and very bizarre. So next week we were going to see the tag titles on the line between Owen and Yoko versus Men on a Mission, and also the 1-2-3 Kid versus Razor Ramon. So that'll
Not
be
not a
probably
bad
next week's main event, I would imagine.
Yeah, not a bad lineup. And nice job, WWF. Well, we'll get into the ratings of the shows afterwards, but for the first head-to-head, do you think they pulled any punches? Do you think they're raring and ready to go? Like where are they at? Are they coming up fighting, or are they just status quo yet at this point?
See, I think at this point, like I was mentioning earlier, they're starting to fall behind WCW. They've lost quite a bit of star power with the Savages and the Hogans. And a lot of the gimmicks, like we said, come across very cheesy. We also had the guy selling merch, Gary, I can't
Barry
even think
Dudinski,
now.
right?
Yeah, selling merch in the middle of the show.
Right.
Corny Todd Pettengill, and I mean, show and match wise, it was decent. It's watchable, but you see where it's just not a sign of growth here as far as what we're going to
Sure.
be moving into the Attitude Era. They're nowhere near the Attitude Era at this point. It
Right.
seems like they're
And
way
and
behind.
and they not as if losing Hogan and Hogan and Macho and those top guys wasn't enough. They're coming up soon on losing Razor and Diesel within the next 9 months. So it's only going to get worse unless they turn the creative gear up, and we'll see that
Right.
starting to happen soon. But it's definitely not here at this point in '95. So
No,
agreed
I
there.
agree. Yes.
So any other thoughts on Raw, or we move on to Monday Nitro?
Let's move on to Monday Nitro. So the first thing you notice when we switch gears here and go into Monday Nitro, which was also 9/11/1995,
Yep.
much bigger production, a huge entrance, and definitely spending a huge amount of money and a bigger budget at this point on their production. What were your thoughts on WCW Nitro's presentation?
Sure, you said it right off the bat. You notice it. Now, with last week coming from the Mall of America, they didn't have the whole elaborate setup, but this is the Nitro stage that we've come to just think of when you think Nitro. You think of the big, huge stage. Everything's metal, everything's truss. It looks off very professional. You could tell, like you said, they invested a lot into it, but it came off well. It showed on the production end of things that they were ready to go with a new format and it's a new product essentially. So they were getting there. I liked it.
Most definitely. So we have the return of Steve Mongo McMichael on commentary. We're very excited to hear his
Well,
voice yet again.
first,
You know,
listening to
uh,
Mongo gives me a headache in my eye, but we'll move on.
but looking back at it, we can also hear some Weasel chants, and it shows you, at this point, Bobby Heenan had not been a manager or really involved in the ring at all in WCW,
Right.
and he was still, over. He was still, the
Oh,
Weasel
sure.
chant was still going, and this would still go on for a while because I remember it was almost like it was the beginning of every show started off with the Weasel chant. So we
Yeah.
also hear we see a recap from last week with Luger and Hogan, like we already talked about, and Vader somehow something about his contract he left. I'm thinking, this is the point where he had moved on to WWF.
Right. Yeah. It's not too much further after this that they announced him for the Rumble, I think. And so, I mean, and there was a couple of months still before he pops up in WWF. But yeah, he was already on the outs with WCW. They had him planned and penciled in to work this program with Hogan and Sting and, face the Dungeon of Goons. But for now, they're talking about he's gone and they're moving on to the storyline without him. So Vader is
Right.
out of WCW at this point, folks.
Yep.
On to the
All right.
first match. We're going to see Sabu making his big debut after last week. That was what the hype was about for us. We were pumped for this. So Sabu and his debut opponent, Alex Wright. Alex Wright, I felt he was underrated, and I liked this match until the end. The end of the match got a little sloppy. You could tell they weren't working on the same
Yeah.
page. The ref even got involved. It was just a weird miscommunication by everybody. Sabu had kind of just tell everybody when they were going home. Something
Right.
went off, but it was still a good match. It was spots, just spot after spot. Um, it highlighted Sabu, I thought, pretty well until the reverse finish. I remember you said you had something to say about that. What did you feel about the DQ finish at the end?
Well, I didn't even like the actual finish of the match. I thought it was kind of soft, especially from what Sabu can do. It just felt like even the crowd was like, "Oh, it's over!" Like it just didn't. I don't know. It didn't fit. I thought if you're going to have Sabu, and now we're at the point where there's no longer enhancement guys and jobbers out there, even though WWF is still kind of using them. But WCW really wasn't doing that, and so they had a pretty intriguing matchup because I thought Alex Wright was pretty talented in his own right as well.
Sure.
With him and Sabu, but the finish was very strange. So he had brought it to do his table spot, which was his famous brought over from FMW in Japan. His famous after the match, he would put himself through or an opponent through a table. So he
Right.
had brought the table to the ring, and after he had put his opponent through the table, Alex Wright, of course, the referee reversed the decision and changed the winner of the match back to Alex Wright. So I felt that it kind of gave this wild man. character that we're seeing with Sabu, kind of giving him some legs there. But also, I thought you wanted to have Sabu debut and look strong, and really, he can still look crazy and still win the match. I mean, why have his debut? He loses. That didn't make sense.
No, no, you have a good point, but at the same time, I like that it pushes the unpredictability of Sabu more than the savageness of him, and it pushes the WCW still a place with rules. So it kind of it's pushing a storyline that is this guy too extreme for our company, but at the same time, he doesn't lose any heat. He just won the match clean and he put his opponent through a table. So in the eyes of the fans, he's still strong, but wins and losses, yeah, he's 0-1 on his debut. So I could see where you would say that kind of hurt him right off the start. But I thought push wise, I thought he looked strong still.
Yeah, I just thought it was a little confusing. You know what I mean? I think the fans were a little
Sure.
confused by the finish, confused by the table spot, confused by the reverse DQ. It was just kind of like, huh, what happened? And I don't think it was a match. It was a decent match, but I don't think it was anything that's going to be, memorable in the sense that like, oh, this is Sabu. This is the guy that did this last week. It just didn't.
Right.
It didn't have any legs for me.
Sure. No, I agree. But this is the start of Sabu and WCW. Won't be a long experiment, but let's enjoy it for what we got. Won't be too long before we see him back in ECW again. But like I said, let's enjoy him for what we got of him on national TV. So,
Sure.
moving on. One thing I wanted to point out at this point in the show, I thought was pretty funny. Three fans sitting hard camera had what was originally, I assume, a WCW sign, WCW. Now, for about 5 minutes during the show at this point, the first W guy turned his sideways, so it said ECW. And I just thought that was funny to point out. So you see it here that ECW, it's grassroots still, but they're getting well known, and good portion of both the WWF and the WCW audience were well aware of what ECW had going on at this point. So.
Well, I think you know, back you up on that, I would say that we know that the ECW fans are more of a hardcore fan base, not hardcore in the sense of hardcore rules, but a real dedicated fan and
Sure.
a real educated fan that knew of these guys that are coming from other countries, like we'll get to when we get to that show from Mexico and Japan, and they had watched tapes and done their homework. They weren't just tuning into WWF every week and watching these cheesy gimmicks or WCW because they were an NWA fan or whatever, lineage that they were following. The hardcore ECW fan was knowledgeable and very passionate about wrestling.
Sure. I agree there. Well, we could get into that a little bit more with this week's Hardcore TV. But let's move along. We saw Ric Flair giving a promo about his feud with Arn Anderson. And these guys were linked together for essentially their whole runs in NWA and WCW.
Right.
It didn't click for me. I thought there was better things they could both be doing, especially with all the transitional stuff that they had with Hogan and Luger, and just if I don't know, it didn't seem like the right time for me for this promo or even the feud itself. Any thoughts, KG? You agree?
Well, yeah, I didn't like it. I still don't like it watching it, going back on it. But apparently, this is setting up for our next pay per view, which we didn't mention. War Games is coming up
Right.
this Sunday following
Right.
this Monday night show. So we're going to see the first match that's announced, even though they kind of talked about Vader being a part of Team Hogan versus Team Dungeon of Goons. So I guess this is the first official match was Arn Anderson versus Ric Flair. So we're going to see them one on one at War Games.
Right.
It
Uh,
makes sense.
I'm sure quality wise, match wise, I'm sure it was a very solid outing, but story wise, it just I don't know. You don't want to see the Horsemen split like that. I don't know.
No.
I didn't see it. I didn't see where who was going to get over in that kind of a situation. But
Right.
one thing we wanted to point out here with the during the Flair promo was Lex Luger out again for the second time in a row. This 2 weeks in a
Yeah.
row, just hanging out. Just wanted to see what was going on, and didn't like the angle from the monitor in the back. Just felt like coming in, then he left. He literally did nothing. It was very out of place. And as the weeks go on, I don't remember them going anywhere with this. Luger and Flair, Luger and Sting. Just was it just
No.
to get out there? Was it just the mystery of what's he doing this week? I kind of lost.
I didn't understand. Yeah, I didn't understand it. I didn't understand when he came out in last week's show as well, because he didn't have anything to do with that match. I thought if you had saved him for the end with Hogan, you would have got a bigger reaction than, oh, we just seen him 10 minutes ago come out
Sure.
for no reason. I thought if he had him came in, whoa, there he is. Oh, he's in the ring with Hogan. It would have been more of a pop. It would have been more of a shock than just having him already come out and just standing ringside for two guys that he has nothing to do with. It just didn't make sense.
Right. No, I agree. So I mean, some things were still questionable at the time, and that's why we're doing this. To point out the bad and the questionable, and
Sure.
praise the good as well. So,
Yep.
moving on to the next thing, we had Michael Wall Street, fresh off his return as IRS, right into a U.S. title shot against Sting. But I think the most important part out of this match was the fact that this was when we heard the very first attack from Eric Bischoff for WWF Monday Night Raw. Thinking back before we got into this program, you and I, Kev, I didn't think it happened right off the bat. I thought they kind of waited a little bit, but no, it was Shawn Michaels hits the big guy with the super kick. It's 2 or 3 weeks old. We're live here on Nitro, so they didn't waste any time in making this an actual war. They didn't coexist, and there was no friendly fire. There was uh, bombs away.
Well, I think as soon as they went on Monday night, as soon as they started Nitro, the first one, they knew they were going to war with WWF. This was it. This was the first, so Bischoff never, pulled any punches. He would always kind of make comments like this throughout the years. But yeah, it's week 2 and he's already saying, telling you the finish of WWF Raw. He's definitely taking a big shot there.
For sure. Then it's only going to get more interesting and more fun from here. That'll lead to the Huckster and Nacho Man skits and a lot of fun stuff. So
Definitely.
The back and forth is what made this a fun time to watch.
Absolutely.
Up next, we saw the in-ring debut of Scott Norton against the Macho Man Randy Savage. KG,
Ooh, yeah.
Good match. I liked it. Stiff, good stuff. And Norton looked like a strong character to me right off the bat.
Well, Norton looked like a strong character only because, well, for one, he's, I'm not going to take anything away from Scott Norton, but the crowd was so into the Macho Man. The Macho Man was not being used at all in WWF. Vince wanted to keep him on commentary. Macho still felt like he had something in the tank, and this match to me proved it. Not only was he still really over, but he could still go. I mean, he's hitting the ropes 100 miles an hour like he always did in the 80s, and it was a solid match. It was one of the kind of cat and mouse things where he kept trying to get a comeback, and Big Scott Norton would knock him down. They did, some good things in the ring. But of course, we saw the Dungeons of Goons come in the ring. Kamala, Kevin Sullivan, the Shark, whatever, Earthquake.
Yep.
Yeah, Booty Man. I mean, it was. We saw the Beefcake. So I mean, it was these guys. I don't know what they were doing. So that we see the cheesiness now of WCW with these guys coming in the ring, like we were talking about with some of the cheesy gimmicks that were going on in WWF.
Right. No, it's I know. We keep going back to it. It was a transitional period for both. That they were both getting out of their growing pains, if you will, and then finding what was going to work for them. With Nitro, it would be a more reality-based NWO takeover style presentation. WWF would adapt, but at this point, they were still hoping one of these cartoon characters they were going to throw it against the wall and it was going to stick. But it just wasn't. It wasn't there. Definitely not with the Dungeon of Doom or some of the characters on the other channel either. So
definitely not.
But no, good match with just goofy finish. And we're gonna come to see that a lot. A lot of just non-finishes, goofy finishes. But I think that's how they justify putting big pay-per-view marquee matchups on TV, is you might not get the actual finish or conclusion that you're looking for. So, but
right.
that brings us to the main event of Nitro. Set it up for us, KG.
Well, we have the main event, of course, from last week. It was building for a whole week, which I thought could have used a little bit more time. But we're also, like I said, they're at war now with WWF. They want to make sure they get their big guns on TV. The World Heavyweight Champion Hulk Hogan versus Lex Luger. So we see Hogan in the early going get a little bit technical. Nice drop toe hold. Hogan had spent some time over in Japan, and I know Hogan always gets knocked for his technical ability. But I felt like when he needed to pull it out, and especially at this point when he was a little bit slimmer and could move a little bit in the ring, he could lock up and he could hold his own in there against a guy. Not like Lex Luger is this technical guy, but his matches with Flair and stuff like that as well. He could hold his own in the ring. I thought it was a pretty decent match.
Yeah, and the fact that it was against a guy like Luger, easy for me to say, shows that he had it a little bit, when he needed it. But that's the thing; it's when he needed it. If you're, and even the same argument can be made for a John Cena. When your 5 moves of doom get you over to the point that you are top of the company, top of the business, who needs it? You don't need to be,
right.
As flashy. And if the boot and the leg drop works for you, I don't blame them. So, but no, sure. Good match, decent match. But again, Dungeon of Doom and then the non-finishes
come back out again. Two
right?
matches in a row. So we see the Dungeons of Goons come out 2 matches in a row. Prior to this point, we had heard that Randy Savage was injured due to Scott Norton. Even though Randy Savage had won the match, he had taken some
Very,
nasty
very
bumps.
serious injury. Yes.
Very serious injury.
Right.
However, after the Goons ran in the ring, we see Randy Savage come out.
Oh,
So
he's fine. Good.
he's fine. Yeah, yeah. A
Good.
little bit of continuity issue there. So
Right.
we're gonna have that, and we also see the other WCW classic. You talked about their matches, their weird finishes. We see the big schmaz with the Goons and Savage, and Luger's still out there, and I think Sting comes out, and they're fighting back and forth about who they're gonna have on their team, whether it be Luger. Savage doesn't want him on the team. He doesn't trust him. Hogan's kind of in the middle, and Sting's his buddy from back in years ago, trying to vouch for his guy to be a part of Team Hogan versus Dungeon of Goons at the pay-per-view War Games.
Sure. And I will say, for as goofy as the dungeon is, if they were going to sell this pay per view, it was the babyface super team was what was selling it. So I like that there was tension. They weren't on the same page. That's the only way the Goons were going to win or have any chance to beat Hogan, Sting, Savage, and Luger, essentially for the top babyfaces in the world at any point. It's essentially a Mount Rushmore of wrestling against Earthquake and Brutus Beefcake. You're not going to buy that. So adding the cravat of none of them trust each other on the same page. Sure, that was a good booking. I thought for if that's the direction you needed to go, that's the way they should have did it. So that wraps up Nitro. Interesting story. The first head-to-head saw a very close ratings battle. Raw wins this week with a 2-5. Nitro's 2-4. So right off the bat, it's neck and neck. It's going to be interesting to see coming up when we start pulling away in which direction, and we're going to look at the patterns too a little bit since we're going to see them week to week. So we'll be able to get more into that as the weeks go on. But really interesting, really close on week 2. First head-to-head.
It shows you the fan base that WCW and the clout that they already had after their first show. This is their second show, already neck and neck with WWF. That show how much how much of an audience that they had compared to how much of an audience WWF was kind of maybe losing at the time, or the fact that they just didn't have the large audiences like they would have in a few years when the Attitude Era really takes off.
Sure. So that wraps up Raw versus Nitro for this week. We'll move into ECW's Hardcore TV quickly. But I do want to take a quick pause real quick. I want to congratulate KG and Mrs. KG celebrating the birth of their second baby boy this week. Congrats, guys. All the best there.
Thank you.
Sure. So moving in real quick. Well, not real quick until we wrap it up, but ECW Hardcore TV. Any thoughts on the opening or anything? How'd they start off this week?
Well, we like to talk about the announce team that's out there. We have pointed out Vince McMahon, how we enjoyed some of his stuff, and Lawler kind of being also a little annoying at times, interrupting. Mongo McMichael on how horrible he is. Bischoff taking shots. We failed to mention a real gem at this time, in my opinion. Joey Styles, a one-man broadcaster, the Vince Scully of the Vince Scully of professional wrestling. Just a real knowledgeable. I don't know. How would you explain him? I'm falling short of words here.
I guess his catchphrase kind of sums it up. Oh my God.
Oh my God.
That was Joey to a T because the passion, he almost, Mauro Ranallo of current day NXT stuff reminds me of Joey and his passion. That shines through. Michael Cole, you don't hear it. He sounds like a robot, pretty much any of the other WWE guys today. But Joey had passion. And you got to give him even more credit for not having a play-by-play guy. It's very hard to talk to yourself for an hour. I have trouble talking to you for an hour, let alone trying to put it together and have it be interesting and not coming off monotone or for whatever reason. You kind of you need somebody to bounce ideas off of and bounce off of for a conversation to work. So it's very difficult to be the sole play-by-play announcer for a 1 hour show and be very entertaining and get over the storylines and not put yourself over in contrast to the talent, whatever, all those things combined. Joey Styles had it, and he was awesome. He was a big part of the ECW package.
Absolutely. And Joey Styles is a perfect example of sometimes less is more, in the sense that he was only a one-man show, but he would also take a step back. He never seemed like he was talking so much or too much. He would let the action speak for itself, and then inject, and then put in some thoughts. He was really good at knowing when to pause and let the segment or the match speak for itself, and when he could interject. And of course, his great catchphrase phrase, "Oh my God!"
For sure. Sure. So, no, Joey gets the praise he deserves, as far as we're concerned. So, yeah. Uh, moving right into the episode, we start things off with the Pitbulls promo, backstage promo with Joey. I liked it, man. These guys were, it's funny going back watching these guys. They're gassed to the gills. They were super, super
Oh yeah,
huge up dudes, but it was a good promo. I liked what they were putting together against Raven and Stevie. It was a good program. It was kind of, they were building towards, like, they couldn't get their hands on him, and then this was it. This was the one they're finally going to get their hands on him, setting up the double chain match for the tag belts.
yes, the double dog collar match, and also if they had lost this match, they were to be split up if they lose. So kind of interesting there. The
Sure.
Pit Bulls couldn't really see a singles run by those guys, although they were decent in the ring as far as being big jack dudes. But
Right.
also we saw the for next week's episode, Rey Mysterio's debut and Psychosis, international superstars. This is
Sure.
what I loved about WCW. WCW, I'm sorry. Well, they will be in WCW soon.
Right.
ECW was the fact that they brought Lucha Libre in, Conan, of course, before these guys, but Rey Mysterio and Psychosis. Uh, every match that they've had is a 5-star match. If you've never watched it, I'd recommend going back, because they even throw in a little bit of hardcore stuff with chairs and stuff, which we really didn't expect to see, and you didn't
Sure.
really see much thereafter between these guys. So I wanted to point that out, because that's a big deal as far as what ECW was bringing to the table, and then what
Sure.
WCW was taking away.
Right. No, it's a very memorable spot. I don't remember if it was from this first match that they'll be debuting on, or one of the few after, but the very
I
memorable
think
spot of,
second match, second
yeah,
match,
the Hurricane
the
Rana off
car.
the stage.
Yeah. Oh, the stage. Okay, but there was the
Yeah.
car one too. I thought you were talking about.
No, no, I just,
Yeah.
you always think of these matches. You always think of that spot for me. It's just the Hurricane Rana off the
Yeah.
stage, the crowd.
I was thinking
Uh,
of the one when they
classic
went
spot.
outside and he gave him the Hurricane Rana off the hood of the car. That's the one I was thinking of.
Also super classic. Yeah, just they
Yeah,
gave these guys a lot of free liability, or a lot of free leeway to have good, unique matches and bring that lucha style to the U.S. essentially for the first
absolutely.
time. It was very unique and very
Definitely.
very different for the time. Um,
Absolutely.
and then, but interesting enough is their time there. It's very small, very very short amount of time before they get called up to Atlanta. So just a couple months, maybe a couple months, we'll be seeing these guys on Monday nights instead. So
Definitely.
all right, getting into
So
the
match
action.
one we saw. Go right
Yeah,
ahead.
Tommy Dreamer versus Dudley Dudley. Now the Dudley clan was an interesting bunch. A lot of you may only be familiar with Bubba and Devon, and maybe Spike, depending on how far back you go if you're just a WWE fan. But the Dudley clan was interesting. They kind of evolved their characters a little bit. In the beginning, they were much like the Slapstick Brothers. Just your inbred hillbilly sports
Yes.
team. But there was a Big Dick Dudley got, or not Big Dick, but Big Daddy Dudley got around, and we
Hmm.
had Bubba, we had Devon, we had Spike, but we also had Big Dick Dudley Dances with Dudley, Sign Guy Dudley, and et cetera, et cetera. There was a whole family clan of Dudleys, and they went through the gamut of baby faces and heels and everything in between. So the Dudleys were for sure an ECW legendary act.
Oh, absolutely. Like I said, like you said, more to the characters than we saw in WWF with the Dudleys, where they were just these guys that came out and get the tables, and that's all we saw. They
Right.
kind of gave this backstory that these were these backwoods kind of inbred family from Dudleyville or
Yeah.
whatever. So we also saw before this match with Big Dick and Tommy Dreamer. Via satellite, we got to see another Cactus Jack promo, which
Oh,
was
right.
another great promo from Cactus Jack.
Yeah, for sure. It goes back to my thoughts on him last week of the Justified Psycho. If you remember what we were talking about there, just the bad guy who he's so justified in what he's doing is right, that you kind of, you have to enjoy a character like that, whether or not you agree with him. It's at least justified, and it's for a reason. So yeah, Cactus, what they were building up with him, it was great stuff. And unfortunately, it's only
Great
a matter of
promo.
time before we'll see Mankind pop up. And not that they didn't do good stuff with Mankind, but Foley and ECW, I think his time got cut a little short because he was putting
Sure.
out great stuff in the ring and backstage.
Absolutely. So next we see the actual match between Big Dick and Tommy Dreamer. Started off pretty slow. The crowd was really not feeling it. We heard some boring chants, and
Yeah.
then Tommy kind of got the crowd back into it with a couple of nut shots. We see that Big Dick is impervious to pain, and Tommy ends up winning the match, and we see how over Tommy was. But how did you feel about the match?
Honestly, I'm not the biggest Tommy Dreamer guy. I respect what he meant to ECW. Personally, I think he was a little overrated. Looking back throughout his entire run, heart and soul of ECW. I can't deny that by any means. But I don't know, just a little overrated on a Tommy Dreamer guy. But as far as the match went, it was a little sloppy, but that's part of the course for what his stuff was in ECW. The boring chants kind of continued until we started seeing the weapons and the nut shots. And I hate to say it, but this is the kind of stuff that ECW got dogged on, and what people looked at it as the whole of ECW. So I don't. It had its place, and it was fine for what it was. But I'd rather watch an Eddie Guerrero Dean Malenko match personally than just a nut shot for the sake of a nut shot. But no, you're right, Tom. But it got him over, and Tommy was ECW at this point, and it only would get stronger as the months and years went on.
Well, the backstory with Tommy, of course, he really had to work hard to win over the fans, and he was one badass dude,
Sure.
and he had really taken some nasty, gone through some grueling matches to win the fans over, and I think the fans respected him for that toughness that he had, and he just seemed to push all the right buttons with that audience for whatever reason, fair or not. After this, we saw the return of Taz. He was suffering, was it a neck injury at this time?
Yeah, Taz always had a lineage of injuries, but I do believe this was a neck injury that he was out with. It was Benoit that put him out. Chris Benoit put him out with a actually, I'm thinking of the Sabu spot when he landed him on his neck. So it
Yeah,
could have
yeah,
been
yeah. I thought of that
injury.
too, though. I was thinking, was it Benoit? Because this match that we're going to see is a promo here with Taz and the Steiner brothers. So the Steiner brothers, a pretty big name, legendary tag team, one of the greatest tag teams of all time. We see with
Sure.
Taz. I thought it was a great pairing. The suplexes and all that fit in perfectly with the Steiner brothers.
Yep.
Of course, Scott and Rick versus Two Cold Scorpio and a mystery partner. Now, who is this mystery partner? We're going to find out since you spoiled it already for the fans.
Right. Chris Benoit comes back, and I think that was the storyline. There was he had a history and a build up with Taz. He's the one who put him out.
Yes.
But yeah, this match was absolutely phenomenal. Told multiple stories within the match, which was an ECW staple. But yeah, it put the Steiners over. They were able to get all their stuff in. Uh, Too Cold Scorpio got him over as a cocky, snarky heel. He couldn't even get along with his partner. Ended up walking out on him halfway. But Benoit, tough as nails, even as a heel, they put him over strong because it took everything the Steiners had to finally put him away. So Benoit comes out looking like $1,000,000. Too Cold walks away looking like $1,000,000. He's better than everybody. And the Steiners got the win strong with their, all their stuff getting in. A perfect booking by ECW. Perfect match. We were actually going to set up a running segment here on the show. What's the match of the week? And this for you and I both, I think, hands down.
Unanimously, yeah.
Yeah, nothing touched this stuff. They gave him some good time too. It kind of took up the second portion of the show. Really good tag match. Go out of your way to see it. The Steiners versus Too Cold and Benoit from the 9/12/95 episode of Hardcore TV.
Oh, it was an awesome match, and of course, nobody was expecting Chris Benoit to show up with Too Cold Scorpio. If you're not familiar with Too Cold Scorpio, go back and watch some of his stuff. Also known as Flash Funk, awesome high flyer, could do it all in the ring, and of course,
Sure.
everybody knows how great Chris Benoit was. So it was a great pairing with these guys. You could really see Scott Steiner's ability. We kind of see Scott Steiner and think of him as Big Papa Pump and being kind of sloppy and not being able to move and this big, huge guy. At this point, he was still a big, huge guy, but he could move around the ring like a cruiserweight. I mean,
Yeah.
he was a beast. And Rick was good too. And they just complemented each other as a tag team. But this was actually the main event, and this was definitely our segment or match of the week, hands down, unanimously here. So
Yeah.
moving forward, we saw a promo with the Public Enemy, who are going to be facing the Gangstas next week, actually on a Saturday show. Gangsta's Paradise, which is on the network. I don't want to try to plug the network, but it is on there. We see
All
a
right.
great promo. We also see Sandman being extremely coked out. So the match that that the match that they're setting up is the Gangstas and the champion at the time, the Sandman versus Mikey Whipwreck and the the Eliminators? Yes.
Um,
No, Public
yep.
Enemy. Public Enemy.
Public
That's
Enemy.
we're just talking about. Yeah, we're just talking about Public Enemy. So Public Enemy really over at this time as well. I think they were hometown boys. I think they were Philly boys, if I'm
Sure.
not mistaken.
Yep.
And this was going to be the main event of the Saturday night show. The Saturday night show sounds really good.
Sure. We'll
It
touch
sounds
on that
it's
briefly for next week's episode. And
definitely.
really, next week's episode is going to be a little bit jam packed. We'll run through the pay per view stuff briefly because it's not really our format right now. But we have the ECW show from Saturday night, and of course Fall Brawl on Sunday. So next week's episode we'll have a quick
War
recap
games.
of that stuff. Yeah. And of course,
Yeah.
Dungeon of Doom, man. If you're a big Dungeon of Doom fan, go out of your way and see if they could take down Hulkamania this Sunday on pay per view. But
War
no,
games.
I like, but wrap up WCW or excuse me ECW. I like the Pulp Fiction style montage promos they used to do at the end. Kind of it gives you a quick recap of what your main characters are, what their main storylines are. Keeps everything fresh for you because ECW's they would only maybe be 3 segments a show. So if those are filled up, you're not going to see a lot of the cast and crew for maybe 2 or 3 weeks at a time. So I like those promos. It kept everybody fresh, kept their motives fresh in your mind. So good show
Absolutely.
for ECW this week, September 12th, 95. Good show. I'd recommend it if you want to go ahead and check it out and follow along with us. But what do we have for next week? We have another packed episode ahead, like I said. So
Yeah, definitely. And we're going to be checking out that Saturday show and the pay per view. We're going to give kind of a quick recap of those so you guys kind of know what's going on as we move into Monday Nitro and WWF Raw. We're going to have the 1-2-3 Kid versus Razor Ramon. I assume that'll be the main event. We're going to have the tag titles on the line. WCW, I think they teased a few things. Johnny B. Bad was going to be on. As far as a main event match, we don't really know. I guess we're going to have the fallout of War Games on our
Sure.
hands. We're going to see how that tag team works out between Luger, Sting, Savage, and Hogan, the big 4 huge baby faces against the Dungeon of Goons. So we're going to see the aftermath of that and another great ECW. I mean, it's amazing when you go back and you see how well, first of all, the first thing you notice is they have the lowest budget. They have, probably the worst venue, but their product was so good at this time, and the booking was so good. And we're looking at some of the kind of the gimmicky stuff that WWF and WCW comes across as definitely more of a corny kind of kid show, kind of getting on the border of being a little bit more edgy, but don't really know what they're doing yet.
Sure. I agree. But with ECW, it would only get better. I feel like they were only starting to scratch the surface as we would move into 96, 97. Those were the years that I thought ECW was just on fire. So if it's this good now and they're only building steam, it'll be interesting to see when we get into the summer of 97, 98, some of those pay-per-view along those eras. It's good stuff. So we're in the midst of it now. It's fun to go back and watch them and relive it a little bit from where we were at that point in our lives to now. It's fun to go back. So hope you guys are enjoying what we're putting together here. Any comments, concerns, questions, feel free to get a hold of us. We're on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook. Get a hold of us and leave us some comments and let us know how we're doing. We appreciate the feedback.
Absolutely. And please subscribe to our YouTube page. That's where everything's going to drop fast, obviously on Facebook as well and Instagram. But feel free to subscribe. And look forward to bringing you more podcasts in next week here.
Right on. All right, I think that'll do it for us. We'll wrap up from Cobleskill, New York, with the East over there in KG land. This is Sig out here in Sherman Oaks, California, the west of the East-West Connection podcast. No, East-West Connection Wrestling podcast. You messed it up last week. I'll mess it up this week. We'll see you guys next week.
You're the stupid idiot this week.
Shut up. I'm out of here.